Welcome to the case of the Jade Dragon of Kashgar, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Sherlock Holmes, The Eastern Enigma, Tales from the Great Hiatus, playing in the year 1892. Long after the world believed him gone, I discovered the truth of my friend's great hiatus. Hidden within his old travel trunk were journals written in a complex cipher which, with Mycroft's aid, I have at last decoded. They tell of his years in the enigmatic East from 1891 to 1894, where the master of logic faced mysteries of a most ancient and profound nature. From these remarkable accounts I shall begin with a most perilous affair that took place upon the Silk Road. It is the singular matter Holmes recorded as The Case of the Jade Dragon of Kashgar. Chapter 1. Of all the strange and perilous locales to which my long association with Mr. Sherlock Holmes had led me, none could compare to the stark immensity of the Taklamakan Desert. It was an ocean of ochre sand, stretching to a horizon that shimmered with heat and illusion. Our small caravan, a line of 20 camels laden with goods and guarded by grim-faced men, felt like a fragile vessel upon that unforgiving sea. The sun beat down with a physical weight, and the only sounds were the soft, rhythmic plodding of the camels' feet and the creak of their leather harnesses. Our leader, Captain Karim Al-Jamil, rode beside the man I knew not as Holmes, but as the eccentric Norwegian explorer Sigerson. The captain was a fine figure of a man, his face browned by the sun, but I could detect a tautness around his eyes that betrayed the immense pressure of his charge. He gestured towards the lead camel, which carried a large iron-banded crate. His voice was clear and carried well in the dry air. "There it rests, Sigerson, the Jade Dragon of Kashgar, a gift from an emperor, and my honor is bound to its safe delivery," responded Captain Karim Al-Jamil. Holmes, his face partially wrapped in a scarf against the dust, merely nodded, his keen eyes passing over the crate to scrutinize the men who guarded it. My own gaze drifted to another member of our party, a quiet Armenian gem merchant named Livon Bogasayan. He was a man of middle years, with a placid expression that seemed entirely out of place in this harsh environment. It was Bogasayan, I knew, whose expert eye had authenticated the artifact before it was sealed. His intimate familiarity with our treasure was therefore beyond question. "A curious choice of knot, Captain," Holmes remarked, his tone one of detached curiosity. "The lashing on that crate, it is a seaman's knot, not one I would expect from a desert traveler. It is exceptionally strong, yet its design allows it to be undone with a single specific pull. An unusual skill to find so far from the sea," replied Sherlock Holmes as Sigerson. Karim spared it a swift glance, his reply edged with impatience. "My men ensure security. That is my sole concern," Captain Karim Al-Jamil replied. It was then that I noticed the old caravan master, Yusuf Al-Asmari, rein in his camel. His weathered face, a road map of wrinkles, was turned towards the west. He sniffed the air like a hunting dog. He muttered a low warning, his voice like the scrape of stone on stone. "The sky turns yellow. The sand demons are waking," said Yusuf Al-Asmari. As if summoned by his words, the very character of the day shifted. A low moan grew upon the wind, a sound that seemed to rise from the very earth beneath us. The air grew thick and heavy, and the sun, once a brilliant tyrant, became a pale, sickly disk behind a veil of gathering dust. The distant horizon simply vanished. "Sandstorm!" Karim's voice was a sharp crack of command. "Circle the camels, kneel them, take cover now," answered Captain Karim Al-Jamil. Chaos erupted. The soft plodding gave way to the frantic shuffling of hooves and the shouting of men. The moan of the wind escalated into a deafening shriek that tore at our ears. I pulled my scarf tighter across my face as the first wave of sand struck us, a stinging, abrasive blast that reduced visibility to mere inches. The world dissolved into a roaring, blinding vortex of sand and fury, a churning void where sight and sound were utterly consumed. The world returned to us by degrees. For hours, the furious howl of the wind had been our entire universe. Now it diminished to a mournful whisper that sighed amongst the dunes and then fell silent altogether. A heavy, ochre-coloured gloom remained, the air so thick with suspended dust that each breath a gritty labour. The groans of the camels, shifting uneasily in their tethers, were the first sounds to break the profound stillness. It was Captain Karim who first stirred with purpose, his silhouette moving through the haze towards the centre of our small encampment. My friend Holmes, still under the guise of the Norwegian explorer Sigerson, rose to his feet. His tall, lean frame was alert as he shook the fine sand from his robes. A sudden cry from the captain, sharp with disbelief and dread, cut through the quiet. "It cannot be! Look! By Allah, look!" Captain Karim Al-Jamil answered. We hurried to his side. There, where the stoutest chest had been secured between two slumbering camels, we found a scene of utter ruin. The heavy ironwood crate was smashed to splinters. It had been bound with straps of thick leather and sealed with a formidable lock. Its lid was thrown aside as if by a giant's hand, and the velvet-lined interior lay bare and empty. The Jade dragon of Kashgar was gone. A collective gasp went through the assembled men. Yusuf Al-Asmari, the old caravan master, stumbled forward and fell to his knees. His face was a map of 1,000 such journeys. His voice trembled, a dry rasp of ancient fear. The djinn of the sands! It came in the heart of the storm. No man could do this. It is a spirit's work. The desert has claimed its tribute. Yusuf Al-Asmari answered. A murmur of fearful agreement spread amongst the men. Captain Karim stood as though turned to stone, his face ashen beneath its sun-darkened complexion. But Holmes stepped past him, his movements precise and unhurried. He knelt beside the wreckage, ignoring the superstitious whispers, and picked up a shard of the broken wood. A most material spirit, it would seem, one that requires leverage, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He spoke coolly, his voice a balm of pure reason in the heated atmosphere of panic. He pointed with the splinter towards the base of the chest. "Observe, Captain, the lock is not broken. It was forced. See here, the deep indentations in the wood just beside the clasp. A tool was used, a long, flat piece of metal, I should venture. And notice the direction of the fracture. The lid was not smashed from above, but pried upwards with immense and deliberate pressure, remarked Sherlock Holmes. "But the tracks! There are no tracks leading away. The jinn flies on the wind," responded Yusuf Al-Asmari. "The storm was a most convenient accomplice, was it not? It has swept the slate clean for us. Yet a jinn with a fondness for crowbars is a novelty I have yet to encounter. Our thief, gentlemen, is no phantom. He is made of flesh and blood, and he is still amongst us." Sherlock Holmes responded. Holmes stood, his piercing eyes sweeping over the faces of the stunned caravan crew. But my own gaze was fixed upon Captain Karim. The initial shock had passed, replaced by a look of cold, stark horror. The weight of his failure seemed to settle upon his shoulders. The impossible reality of the void in the sands was crushing him where he stood. In his eyes I saw not just the loss of a priceless artifact, but the dawning terror of a man facing his own ruin. The superstitious murmurs of the caravan guards followed us through the encampment, their hushed tones lost to the ceaseless whisper of the desert wind. Yusuf's tale of a spectral thief had taken root in the men's minds, and an air of profound unease hung heavier than the evening chill. At the center of the camp, the largest tent stood apart, its canvas walls taut against the gusts. It belonged to our friend and guide, Captain Karim Al-Jamil, and it was he who had summoned us with an urgency that bordered on panic. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of spiced tea and lamp oil. A single lantern cast long, dancing shadows that made the space seem both smaller and more menacing. Maps of the treacherous Silk Road were pinned to a makeshift table, their edges curling in the dry air. Captain Karim stood with his back to us, a rigid silhouette against the canvas. He turned as the tent flap fell shut behind us, the soft thud of the fabric sealing us within the confines of his despair. "Sigerson, thank you for coming. I find myself in a position from which there is no honorable escape," Captain Karim Al-Jamil said. His voice, usually so commanding, was strained to a near whisper. The proud bearing of the soldier had vanished, replaced by the haunted look of a man staring into an abyss. He gestured towards two cushions on a fine rug, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. "The impossible, Captain, is merely the difficult unexamined. Pray tell us everything," replied Sherlock Holmes. Holmes's tone was calm and steady, a stark contrast to our host's agitation. He settled himself with an air of detached curiosity, as if presented with a curious intellectual puzzle rather than a matter of life and death. "You heard Yusuf, a jinn of the sands. He swears it upon his ancestors. No tracks, the crate broken from within. My men believe him. By Allah, in the silence of this desert, I almost believe him myself. But a spirit cannot be caught and brought before the Emir for justice," replied Captain Karim Al-Jamil. He began to pace the narrow confines of the tent, his boots scuffing softly against the rug. The rhythmic, agitated sound filled the silence between his words. "And the Emir will demand justice. You do not understand the gravity of this, my friend. The Jade Dragon was a tribute, a symbol of fealty. Its loss is not a simple theft. It is an insult. The penalty for such a failure is not dismissal or imprisonment," responded Captain Karim Al-Jamil. He stopped then and looked directly at Holmes. The lamplight caught the profound fear in his eyes. "The price is my head," The executioner's sword awaits me in Kashgar, Captain Karim Al-Jamil answered. The confession hung in the air, stark and terrible. The wind howled faintly outside, a mournful counterpoint to the captain's grim pronouncement. He took a deep, shuddering breath before stepping closer to Holmes, his desperation now stripped of all pretense. I have seen you work, Sigerson. I have seen that mind of yours cut through deception like a knife through silk. I do not know who you truly are, but I know you are more than a simple explorer. I am a soldier, and I am lost in a battle against shadows. I beg you, not as my employer, but as a man pleading for his life, apply your logic to this madness. Find me a thief of flesh and blood, replied Captain Karim Al-Jamil. Holmes remained silent for a long moment, his steepled fingers pressed against his lips. His gaze was fixed upon the flickering flame of the lantern, his mind clearly working at a furious pace. At last he lowered his hands and met the captain's gaze. His voice, when he spoke, was sharp and decisive, devoid of sentiment, but filled with a sudden, electrifying purpose. Fear is a fountain, Captain. Data is a stone. We shall build our foundation upon the latter. Your plea is accepted. An investigation requires a starting point, and superstition, however foolish, is a point of fact in the mind of the believer. We shall begin with the origin of the narrative, stated Sherlock Holmes. Take me to Yusuf Al-Asmari. I wish to hear his testimony of the desert wind for myself, Sherlock Holmes noted. The chill of the desert night descended, a stark contrast to the day's oppressive heat. In the center of our camp, a large fire crackled, its flames casting long shadows against the canvas tents. The still air carried the scent of wood smoke and roasted coffee. A heavy silence had fallen over the men after Captain Karim's desperate plea, a quiet born not of peace, but of profound fear. It was this silence that Holmes, in his guise as Sigerson, chose to break. His voice was calm and measured, a stone of reason dropped into a pool of anxious superstition. Captain, if I am to be of service, I must begin at the beginning. I should like to speak with your caravan master, the man Yusuf. I wish to hear his account of the events before the storm, replied Sherlock Holmes. The man in question was summoned. Yusuf Al-Asmari, a figure carved from the desert itself, his skin the texture of dried leather, his eyes narrowed against a lifetime of sun and sand, sat before us on a worn rug. The firelight deepened the lines on his face as he regarded Holmes with a weary and profound suspicion. His voice was a low rasp, like the dry scrape of sand against rock. What is there to tell that the wind has not already screamed? The jinn came. It is the way of this place. The empty quarter does not give up its secrets to foreigners. Yusuf Al-Asmari replied. I am not asking for secrets, merely for observations, Holmes replied, his tone gentle but firm. Tell me of the hours leading up to the storm. What did you see? What did you hear? Stated Sherlock Holmes. Yusuf stared into the flames for a long moment, the fire reflecting in his dark eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice held a chilling reverence that captivated the other men. Before the sky turned to brass, the air grew strange. The heat shimmered, but not as it should. Figures danced in the distance, tall, thin things that were not men. They twisted and writhed where there was only sand. It was the mirage, you say? No, a mirage does not whisper your name, remarked Yusuf Al-Asmari. A murmur of fear went through the listening men. I confess, even I felt a prickle of unease at the old man's conviction. Whispers? Holmes inquired, leaning forward slightly. What words did they speak? Stated Sherlock Holmes. He shook his head, his expression grim. Not words, a sound, like 1,000 grains of sand rubbing together, forming a hiss that slid into your ear and chilled your soul. It promised thirst. It promised oblivion. It was the voice of the sand spirit, the djinn, calling its storm to claim its prize. We covered our heads, but you cannot block out the desert when it wishes to be heard. Then the wind rose, a shriek that tore at the tents, and when it passed, the dragon was gone, replied Yusuf Al-Asmari. Yusuf fell silent, his testimony complete. The story, steeped in the lore of this unforgiving land, was so powerfully told it seemed to hang in the air, more tangible than the ground beneath our feet. I glanced at Holmes, expecting a battery of questions to dismantle the fantastic tale. Instead, he simply nodded slowly. "Thank you, Yusuf. You have been most clear," he said, his voice betraying no hint of his thoughts. The old man gave a curt nod and retreated into the shadows, his duty done, observed Sherlock Holmes. When we were alone again, save for the anxious Captain Karim, I could not contain myself. Good heavens, Holmes, what are we to make of such a tale? A spirit that whispers on the wind and steals from a sealed crate? It is beyond belief, Dr. John Watson replied. Holmes rose, turning his back to the fire to gaze into the impenetrable darkness. The desert wind was rising again, a low moan that rustled the tent flaps with ghostly fingers. His reply cut cleanly through the night. "It is precisely because it is beyond belief that it is of no use to us, my dear fellow. We are not fighting spirits. We are hunting a man of flesh and blood. The wind may tell many tales, but it does not lie about the evidence it leaves behind. Tomorrow morning we shall ignore the testimony of the wind and listen instead to the testimony of the sand, the wood, and the plaster," observed Sherlock Holmes. The caravan master's tale of desert spirits had left a palpable chill upon our company. A remarkable feat beneath the oppressive glare of the Kashgarian sun. The men spoke in hushed, nervous tones, their eyes darting towards the shimmering horizon, as if expecting some spectral marauder to reappear. Only Holmes, whom they knew as Sigerson, seemed immune to the spreading panic. He stood apart, his gaunt frame a silhouette against the blinding sand, his gaze methodically dissecting the scene of the supposed crime. Captain Karim approached me, the soft crunch of his boots on the gritty earth the only sound in the immediate vicinity. His face, usually a mask of command, was etched with a profound anxiety. His voice was a low, troubled murmur. "He has them all believing in ghosts, Doctor, and I confess, even I, what man or beast leaves no tracks? The sand is a perfect ledger, yet this page is utterly blank," answered Captain Karim Al-Jamil. Before I could offer what little comfort I possessed, Holmes, with an abruptness characteristic of him when a thought struck, turned from his survey. It was clear to me that he had already dismissed the grand theatrical mystery of the missing tracks, choosing instead to focus his formidable intellect upon the one tangible piece of evidence before us. Without a word, he strode to the epicenter of the disturbance and knelt beside the scattered white debris, his long, thin fingers probing the fragments with the delicacy of a surgeon. He picked up a shard, a piece no larger than my palm, and held it aloft. He rubbed it between his thumb and forefinger, a fine white powder dusting his skin. He brought it close to his aquiline nose, sniffing it with an intensity that I found both peculiar and familiar. Captain Karim and I drew closer, our shadows falling over him. His voice, though quiet, cut through the sighing of the wind with absolute clarity, a familiar note of intense focus. "Curious, most curious indeed," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. "What is it, Sigerson? Is it some form of magic, a substance unknown to us?" Captain Karim Al-Jamil said. Holmes offered a dry chuckle, a sound devoid of mirth. "Hardly magic, my dear Captain. It is plaster, common, brittle, and exceedingly cheap plaster of Paris, barely strong enough to hold its own shape, let alone protect a priceless artifact. Feel the weight of it. It is porous, light as pumice," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He pressed the fragment into Karim's hand. The captain's brow furrowed in confusion as he felt the insubstantial, chalky texture. Holmes rose to his feet, dusting his hands with a series of sharp, decisive claps. "Consider the logic, Captain. An imperial treasure, a dragon of pure jade worth a king's ransom, is to be transported across the most perilous terrain on earth. Would you, a man of military precision, entrust it to a vessel of such pathetic quality? A crate that might be shattered by a clumsy porter, let alone a phantom of the desert? No, you would demand iron and hardwood and locks forged in the finest smithies." His words sliced through the hot, dry air, and I watched as he dismantled the supernatural edifice with the cold chisel of pure reason. In his mind, the central question had already shifted. The problem, I now saw, was not the absence of tracks, but the glaring presence of this ludicrously inadequate container. The impossibility of the crime was beginning to shift, its central pillar revealed not as spectral force, but as the far more mundane, yet equally sinister, human deception. He fixed his gaze upon the distant cluster of tents where the other travellers huddled. The gin of the sands is a fiction designed to obscure the facts. And the facts, I suspect, reside not in the whispers of the wind, but in the testimony of men. We shall speak with them, every last one, remarked Sherlock Holmes. The sun began its descent, painting the dunes in hues of orange and violet. Around our central fire, the murmur of worried voices blended with the crackle of burning tamarisk. Holmes, his face a mask of concentration in the flickering light, moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose. I watched as he spoke first to a grizzled camel driver, whose denials were as rough as his sun-beaten hands, and then to a young guard who stammered his account of the uneventful watch. One by one he questioned them all, his inquiries brief and pointed, his gaze missing nothing. "Captain Karim, be so good as to send the Armenian merchant to my tent. Mr. Bogosian, is it not?" explained Sherlock Holmes. A few moments later, the tent flap was drawn aside, and a man of slight build and nervous disposition stooped to enter. This was Levon Bogosian, a trader in gems, his dark eyes darting about the tent as if expecting some phantom to leap from the shadows. He clutched a set of prayer beads in one hand, his thumb working them over with a frantic rhythm.
"You wish to see me, Sigerson Sahib? I know nothing, I swear it. I was in my tent, praying for a safe journey when the commotion began." "Your precise location is of little consequence, Mr. Bogosian," Holmes replied, his tone disarmingly mild. "I am merely interested in what you might have observed. Anything out of the ordinary? A strange sound? A peculiar shadow?" remarked Sherlock Holmes.
Bogosian shook his head, his whole body seeming to shrink into itself. He raised a hand to his brow, as if to ward off a headache, a gesture of great weariness and fear. "Nothing, Sahib, only the wind. It is, as the others say, a jinn has taken the dragon, a spirit of the sands, jealous of its beauty. We have disturbed it, and now we are cursed," responded Levon Bogosian. It was then, as the lantern light fell upon the merchant's hand, that I saw Holmes's gaze sharpen with an intensity I knew well. His posture, previously relaxed, became rigid. I, of course, saw nothing but a trembling hand. Yet I knew that look. It was the look of a naturalist who has just spotted a rare and telling specimen. His mind, I would later learn, was racing far ahead of the man's superstitious talk. The man's performance of terror was nearly perfect, Holmes recounted to me later, but his body betrayed him. His words spoke of phantoms, yet his hand spoke of labour. For there, Watson, lodged beneath the nail of his right forefinger, was a trace of white powder. Not the coarse grit of the desert, but a fine dust, identical to the plaster of Paris from which the replica had been fashioned. "I see. Your fear is quite understandable. You may return to your tent, Mr. Bogosian. Thank you for your time," declared Sherlock Holmes. The Armenian merchant offered a relieved bow and scurried from the tent, the canvas flap falling shut behind him with a soft swish. I looked to Holmes, expecting a triumphant declaration, some explanation for the sudden gleam in his eye. But he said nothing. Instead, he rose and paced the small confines of the tent, his brow furrowed. Then, with sudden decisiveness, he strode to the entrance and pushed aside the flap, his eyes fixed not on the men or the fire, but upon the placid form of the camel that had borne the vanished cargo. The interview with the Armenian merchant, Bogosian, had left us precisely where we had started, adrift in a sea of conjecture. Holmes, or Sigerson as he was known in this arid land, said nothing as we departed the tent. Yet the tight set of his jaw spoke volumes of a profound dissatisfaction. Instead of returning to our own quarters, he strode with purpose towards the far side of the encampment, where the camels were tethered for the night. A low, guttural moaning from the great beasts filled the air, mingling with the scent of dust and dry straw. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the sand. Captain Karim, his face a mask of weary patience, followed close behind us. The soft thud of our boots on the packed earth was the only other sound. His voice was low, so as not to disturb the animals. "Sigerson, the men have told you all they know. What purpose is there in disturbing the beasts?" Captain Karim Al-Jamil answered. Holmes did not turn, his gaze already fixed upon one camel in particular, the very one designated to carry the Emma's tribute. It was a large, placid-looking creature, chewing its cud with an air of supreme indifference. Holmes moved towards it, his step slow and deliberate, his eyes missing no detail of its harness or the heavy, ornate saddle still strapped to its back.
His expression was one of intense concentration. I knew that look well. He was dismissing the flawed testimony of men in favor of the unassailable logic of physical evidence. Men might lie, his posture seemed to say, but a camel is a creature of magnificent honesty. It carries its history upon its back. He ran a gloved hand, not over the saddle's fine leather, but deliberately over the thick, coarse ropes that secured it. He stopped, pinching one between his thumb and forefinger, holding it up in the fading light. He beckoned us closer. My gaze followed his, and I could now discern what had captured his attention. Where one would expect the fibers to be clean and strong, fit for a single important journey, they were instead alarmingly worn. The hemp was frayed, its strands separating like an old tassel. A fine, pale dust, different from the red sand of our present location, was ground deep into its weave, and dark, greasy stains marked it in several places. It was the rope of a common pack animal, one that had seen months, if not years, of hard labor. I saw the connections forming behind his eyes. He was recalling Captain Karim's insistence that the caravan was assembled specifically for this tribute, that this very camel and its tack were new to the route. The saddle was fine, perhaps, but the rope in his hand told a different story. This was not the binding of a single ceremonial journey, but of a workhorse. Its condition was a direct contradiction of the official narrative. He released the rope, a thoughtful expression replacing his intense focus. Captain Karim shifted his weight, but Holmes offered no explanation, instead turning his gaze to the ground around the animal's feet. His mind, I knew, had already dismissed the convenient fiction of desert spirits. A frayed rope was a fact, and if this beast had been on a journey other than the one described, his silence seemed to say, then the next logical step was to search not for a phantom thief, but for the physical residue of that secret journey. Once satisfied with the camel's ropes, Holmes did not rise. To my considerable surprise, he lowered himself to his hands and knees upon the sun-baked earth. The wind, our constant companion, fell to a mere whisper. The silence of the great desert pressed in, broken only by the soft crunch of sand beneath my friend's searching fingers. He moved with the slow, deliberate patience of a geologist examining strata, his entire being focused upon the ground where the beast had stood. He produced his powerful pocket lens, an instrument I had seen him employ to scrutinize everything from a smudge of ink to the fabric of a lady's sleeve. Here, under the immense blue vault of the sky, it seemed a fragile tool, yet in his hands it became a key to unlock the most stubborn of secrets. He swept the lens back and forth over the ochre grains, his brow furrowed in a familiar mask of intense concentration. For a long while there was nothing. Then I saw him pause, bringing the lens so close to the ground that his nose nearly touched it. With the tip of a slender knife, he scraped at the sand, isolating a minute quantity of a fine, whitish powder, almost invisible against the paler grains. It was a substance utterly alien to this barren landscape. He glanced up, his gaze travelling from the dust on his knife point to the coarse feed bag on a nearby saddle, and then to the placid camel itself. A thought, an entire chain of reasoning, was clearly taking shape behind those keen grey eyes. Could the animal have ingested it? Perhaps from contaminated feed, or by licking the foreign powder from its own hide. A thought, an entire chain of reasoning, was clearly taking shape behind those keen grey eyes. Could the animal have ingested it? Perhaps from contaminated feed, or by licking the foreign powder from its own hide.
The notion was abstract, yet Holmes was a man who dealt only in the tangible. He required proof. Straightening up, he brushed the sand from his knees and retrieved a small metal specimen box and a pair of forceps from his travelling case. What followed was a procedure of a somewhat indelicate nature, yet he performed it with the dispassionate air of a botanist collecting a rare fungus. He located the camel's droppings, dried almost instantly by the ferocious heat, and with methodical care selected a piece and sealed it within the tin. The sharp click of the lid closing echoed in the profound stillness, a sound of grim purpose. He gave me a single sharp nod. His eyes alight with unspoken theories, and we returned to our tent without a word. Inside the stifling shade, he wasted no time. His compact chemical set was laid out upon a travelling trunk, a miniature laboratory in the wilderness. A small spirit lamp was soon lit, its flame a tiny, unwavering point of light in the gloom. The air grew thick with the sharp, clean scent of his reagents. He worked swiftly, crushing a portion of the sample into a fine powder. He placed the dust into a watch-glass. Then, from a small vial, he allowed a single drop of hydrochloric acid to fall. The result was immediate and, to my mind, conclusive. A distinct effervescence, a soft but insistent fizzing, rose from the watch-glass. It was the unmistakable reaction of a carbonate. Holmes's lips tightened in a line of grim satisfaction. He was not finished, however. Taking a small portion of the original sample with his forceps, he introduced it into the hottest part of the spirit lamp's flame. For a moment there was nothing but the usual yellow glare. But then, as the substance began to incandesce, the flame was tinged with a faint yet undeniable shade of brilliant green. Plaster of Paris, contaminated with a salt of copper, the components of a cheap painted imitation. Holmes extinguished the lamp. The sudden darkness in our tent seemed to amplify the magnitude of his discovery. He did not speak, but turned to me, and in the dim light I saw the fire of triumph in his eyes. The djinn of the sands had been banished. In its place stood a common criminal, and in that small tin box my friend now held the incontrovertible proof of his method. We returned to Captain Karim's tent, the desert wind whispering against the canvas walls like a restless spirit. The air within was thick with anticipation. Holmes, or Sigerson as I still knew him, moved with a quiet, deliberate energy that belied the astonishing discovery he had just made. He placed the small, cloth-wrapped sample of evidence upon a low wooden table, its presence now dominating the small space. Karim, his face etched with worry, tracked my companion's every movement. "Karim, for 2 days we have pursued a phantom. We have chased a story of jinns and desert magic, but the truth, as is so often the case, is rooted in something far more tangible," explained Sherlock Holmes. "A phantom? But, Sigerson, the crate was smashed to splinters. I saw it with my own eyes. The dragon was gone," responded Captain Karim Al-Jamil. Holmes gave a slight shake of his head, his gaze unwavering. He did not mock the captain's belief, but countered it with the solid force of logic. "You saw precisely what the culprit intended for you to see. A performance, Captain, staged upon the grand theatre of the desert. But the performance had a flaw. A trace of dust was left behind." Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. He gestured to the sample on the table. Karim leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, trying to comprehend a puzzle whose pieces he could not yet see. The gentle flap of the tent's entrance was the only sound that broke the ensuing silence. "Let us reconsider the facts, not as a mystic might, but as an engineer. You told me the ropes binding the crate seemed old and worn. Why would one use inferior rope to secure a treasure of such immense value? It is illogical. Unless, of course, the ropes were never meant to provide true security, but only the appearance of it," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. "They were. Yes, they were frayed. I thought it careless, but I did not question the quartermaster's provisions," responded Captain Karim Al-Jamil. "Precisely. Now consider this." He carefully unfolded the cloth, revealing the fine greyish powder within. "This is plaster of Paris, mixed with a cheap green pigment. I found traces of it in the camel's feed bag, and my analysis of the animal's dung confirmed its presence in quantity. The beast ingested it before our journey ever began," Sherlock Holmes noted. A deep stillness settled over the tent. Karim stared at the dust, then back at Holmes, as a terrible understanding washed over his features, shifting them from confusion to utter astonishment. Holmes delivered the final stroke with dispassionate clarity. "The Jade Dragon of Kashgar was never in that crate. It never left the city. Before your caravan departed, the real artifact was removed and replaced with a plaster replica. The theft you witnessed was nothing more than the convenient destruction of this worthless forgery, an act designed to shatter into dust and leave behind an unsolvable mystery," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Karim spoke in a hoarse whisper, the words catching in his throat. "A replica, a swap. Then my honor was not lost to a spirit, but stolen by a man?" Captain Karim Al-Jamil answered. Holmes's expression softened, a rare occurrence. He stepped forward, his gaze direct and reassuring. "Your honor was betrayed, Captain, not forfeited. The crime was one of profound cunning, not of supernatural power. This fundamentally changes our investigation. We are no longer hunting a ghost in the dunes," Sherlock Holmes said. His voice became pointed, a tool honed for inquiry. "The question is no longer how the dragon was stolen from the caravan, but a far more critical one. Who, in Kashgar, possessed the access and the audacity to make the exchange?" The revelation filled the tent, as palpable as the scent of spiced tea and old canvas. Outside, the desert wind moaned a low, mournful tune, causing the flame in the oil lamp to dance and cast our shadows into grotesque, elongated shapes. Captain Karim Al-Jamil sat perfectly still upon a Persian rug, his face a mask of disbelief. The truth of the plaster replica had shattered his world, replacing the terror of a supernatural foe with the cold reality of human treachery. The game was not what it appeared. The destruction of the false dragon here in the desert was merely the final act of the play, a piece of misdirection to occupy our minds while the true prize was spirited away, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Holmes spoke with a calm, almost academic detachment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. He had moved on from the discovery, his mind already racing ahead to the next logical step. Karim, however, could only shake his head, the motion slow and heavy.
But, Sigerson, if the dragon was never in the crate, then the theft, it did not happen here. It happened before we ever saw the sands. Captain Karim Al-Jamil answered, "Precisely. The Phantom of the Dunes is a fiction designed to conceal a simple physical exchange. The question of how it vanished is now irrelevant. We must instead ask who. Who could have performed such a swap?" remarked Sherlock Holmes.
He leaned forward, the lamplight catching the sharp planes of his face. The casual rustle of his robes was the only sound for a moment, save for the ever-present whisper of the wind. Think back, Captain, to Kashgar, to the very day the Jade dragon was crated for its journey. Walk me through the process. Every detail, no matter how trivial it may seem, is of the utmost importance, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Karim closed his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration. His voice, when he began to speak, was strained, as if he were pulling the memories from a great and painful depth. The Emma's own guards were present. The crate was of iron-bound teak. I saw the dragon placed within myself. It was nestled in straw, wrapped in canvas. Every precaution was taken. I oversaw it all. Captain Karim Al-Jamil answered. And the materials? The straw? The canvas? Whence did they come? Sherlock Holmes noted.
They were supplied by Levon Bogosian. He is a trusted merchant, known for the quality of his goods. He provides for many caravans, Captain Karim Al-Jamil said. A sudden stillness seized the captain. His hand flew to his throat, and his eyes snapped open, wide with a dawning horror. The connection had been made. Holmes simply watched him, his expression unreadable. He was there, in the courtyard. He insisted on demonstrating the correct way to cushion the crate, to protect a delicate artifact from the rigors of the journey. He supervised the packing of the straw himself, citing his expertise with fragile gems. We thought it a kindness, responded Captain Karim Al-Jamil. His voice trembled slightly on the final words. The quiet, unassuming gem merchant, whose only role had seemed to be that of a passenger, was suddenly cast in a stark and sinister new light. He had not only the means and the materials, but the perfect, unsupervised opportunity. An expert in precious articles, offering his assistance out of professional courtesy. It is the most exquisite sort of camouflage, is it not? The wolf offering to guard the sheep. Sherlock Holmes responded.
Holmes rose to his feet in a single decisive motion. The time for reflection was over. The moment for action was at hand. The dancing shadows on the tent wall seemed to deepen, gathering like conspirators. Captain, the illusion of the jinn has served its purpose. It is time to draw back the curtain. I should be most grateful if you would summon both Yusuf Al-Asmari and our helpful merchant, Mr. Bogosian, to this tent. Say that I have an announcement regarding the safety of our journey. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The sun had bled its last crimson stain upon the western horizon. A profound silence descended upon the desert, broken only by the mournful cry of a distant jackal. Outside our tent, the canvas walls flapped with a soft, rhythmic report against the cooling night wind. Inside, a single oil lamp hissed. It cast a pool of unsteady amber light, throwing our shadows, long and distorted, against the woven hangings. Holmes, who had been sitting in perfect stillness for the better part of an hour, finally stirred, looking towards Captain Karim. His face, half in light, half in darkness, gave his sharp features an almost hawk-like intensity. "Captain, I should be obliged if you would summon Yusuf Al-Asmari and the merchant Bogosian. It is time we brought this affair out of the realm of superstition and into the light," stated Sherlock Holmes. "At once, Sigerson Sahib," said Captain Karim Al-Jamil. Karim's reply was clipped, his voice strained with the terrible weight of his predicament. He rose, his boots scuffing softly on the thick Persian rugs, and disappeared through the tent flap. The flap fell closed behind him with a heavy sigh of fabric. We waited. The minutes stretched, punctuated only by the sputtering of the lamp wick. Holmes produced his pipe and began to pack it with that noxious shag he favoured, his movements methodical and precise. Presently the flap was thrown open again. Captain Karim entered first, followed by the caravan master, Yusuf. The man's dark eyes darted nervously into the corners of the tent, as if he expected to find some spectral form lurking there. Behind him, shuffling with a quiet diffidence that seemed his permanent state, came the Armenian gem merchant, Levon Bogosian. He clasped his hands before him, his gaze fixed upon the ground. "You sent for us, Captain. The night is for prayer, not for questions that have no earthly answer," Yusuf Al-Asmari replied. His voice was a low rumble, thick with a piety that bordered on accusation. Holmes gestured with his pipe stem towards the cushions arranged in a semicircle. "Pray, be seated, gentlemen. It is precisely an earthly answer that we have gathered to find. For every effect, Yusuf, there is a cause. And the cause of our present difficulty is not, I assure you, a jinn," remarked Sherlock Holmes. The old caravan master shook his head, his lips moving in a silent prayer. But he sat. Bogosian sank onto a cushion without a word. He was a small, unassuming figure, almost lost in the great shadows that danced about him. Holmes lit his pipe. For a long moment the only sound was the gentle puffing as he drew the tobacco alight. The smoke curled up, wreathing his head in a grey halo. "We have been labouring under a misconception. We have searched for a thief who could pass through canvas walls and lift a heavy object without a sound. We have, in essence, been hunting a phantom," observed Sherlock Holmes. He paused, letting his words settle in the heavy air of the tent. His bright, piercing eyes moved from Yusuf's fearful face to Karim's tense profile. They finally came to rest upon the quiet merchant. But there was no phantom. There was no supernatural theft in the desert. The Jade Dragon of Kashgar was never stolen from this caravan for the simple reason that it was never here. The crime we are investigating is not one of theft, but of a most ingenious substitution. And the man responsible for this masterful illusion sits amongst us now, deduced Sherlock Holmes.
The interior of the main tent was a theatre of shadows. A single oil lamp, placed centrally upon a low table, threw our elongated figures against the canvas walls. They danced and trembled with every whisper of the desert wind outside. Captain Karim sat rigid, his face a mask of strained composure. Opposite him, the old caravan master, Yusuf, muttered to himself, his fingers worrying a string of prayer beads. Between them, the gem merchant Levon Bogosian seemed the smallest of all, a hunched and unassuming figure who kept his eyes fixed upon the patterns of the rug at his feet.
My friend, still known as Sigerson, rose slowly to his feet. The sudden movement drew every eye. He let the silence stretch, a palpable thing, until the faint hiss of the lamp seemed as loud as a serpent. We have been troubled by phantoms, by tales of a jinn that can pass through solid objects and vanish into the air, leaving no trace. It is a compelling story, Yusuf, and one born of this magnificent, unforgiving landscape, deduced Sherlock Holmes. He addressed the old man directly, his tone one of academic curiosity rather than accusation. Yusuf looked up, his expression a mixture of fear and defiance. "It is the truth. I saw the chest was empty with my own eyes. No man could have done it," responded Yusuf Al-Asmari. "Precisely. No man could have, and therefore no man did. A spirit, you say? A creature of smoke and wind? Then pray tell me, how did this spirit manage to leave a minute scratch of steel upon the brass hasp of the lock? A jinn has no need of a lockpick. And how did it contrive to shed a single dark thread, a thread of Armenian wool, I believe, near the chest's hinge, where it was caught on a splinter of wood?" Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Holmes's voice was as sharp and clear as splintered glass. He did not raise it, yet every word cut through the superstitious fog that had clouded our investigation. Captain Karim leaned forward, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension. Yusuf simply stared, his mouth agape. The supernatural explanation was dissolving before our very eyes, replaced by the stark and unwelcome light of human agency. My friend's gaze then moved from the bewildered caravan master. It passed over Karim, and it settled with an unnerving intensity upon the quiet figure of the gem merchant. The illusion was masterful. A duplicate chest, a moment of misdirection during the sandstorm, and the substitution was complete. All that was required was an actor of consummate skill, one who could play the part of the meek and frightened traveller so perfectly that no one would ever think to look his way. "Is that not so, Mr. Bogosian?" replied Sherlock Holmes. A gasp escaped Karim. I myself was stunned into silence. Levon Bogosian did not flinch. He did not cry out in denial. Instead, a most extraordinary transformation took place. He slowly raised his head, and the timid, downtrodden expression he had worn for weeks simply vanished. In its place was a look of such fierce, blazing intelligence, a cunning pride so profound it was chilling.
A faint, knowing smile touched his lips. It was the look of a master craftsman admiring his own handiwork, and it was all the confession Holmes needed.
Levon? It cannot be. For what purpose? Simple greed? Replied Captain Karim Al-Jamil. The merchant's smile disappeared, replaced by a sudden and terrible coldness. When he spoke, his voice was unrecognizable, a low and furious thing, stripped of all its former humility. Greed? You speak of greed? That dragon was never yours to possess. It was forged by my great-grandfather's hands and stolen by the Emir's ancestors. You call this theft? I call it the reclamation of a legacy. I call it justice for my blood. Levon Bogosian answered. The chill of the desert dawn settled upon us, a tangible cold that carried the clean, sharp scent of sand. Before us stood Levon Bogosian, no longer the unassuming merchant, but a man transformed by the unburdening of a generational secret. The fury I had witnessed moments before had cooled into a hard, unyielding pride that seemed to straighten his very spine. You are a clever man, Sigerson, cleverer than any I have met. But you have only uncovered a method, not a prize, replied Levon Bogosian. Captain Karim stepped forward, the first rays of sun glinting on the hilt of his jambia, though they offered no warmth against the biting air. His tone was heavy with the weight of his restored honor. "The dragon, Bogosian, where is it?" remarked Captain Karim Al-Jamil. The Armenian offered a thin, almost pitying smile, his lips barely curving. The sound of the camels stirring in their enclosure reached us, a low grunting and the sharp, musky scent of the beasts heralding the new day. "It is safe. It is with my family, where it has belonged for 200 years. The false one you carry was a trifle to construct, a copy made from memory, good enough to fool a greedy Emir, but not a true artisan. The real dragon of Kashgar is gone from this land forever. It has returned home," Levon Bogosian said. Holmes spoke quietly, his gaze fixed on the merchant's face. "You will not reveal its location, then, not even to save your own life?" Sherlock Holmes replied. "My life." He gave a short, sharp laugh that was utterly without humor. "My life is forfeit, I know this, but the legacy of my ancestors is not. That is a victory the Emir and his clan of thieves can never take from me. Its location is a secret I shall carry to my grave," Levon Bogosian said. A long, heavy moment passed, the air so still I could feel the fine grit of sand on my teeth. The weight of decision fell entirely upon Captain Karim. His face was a mask of conflicting duties, to his master, to the law, and to a strange, desert-born sense of justice. He looked from the defiant merchant to the impassive face of my friend, and a deep sigh escaped his lips, a plume of white mist mingling with the thin, cold air. He spoke at last, his voice resonating with a new-found authority. "Your crime was not theft, but deception. You have cleared my name by your confession, and for that I am in your debt. But you have lied to the Emir. The law demands your life," responded Captain Karim Al-Jamil. He paused, his hand slowly withdrawing from the hilt of his dagger. The camp was now fully awake. The sounds of men preparing for the day's journey and the faint, welcome aroma of brewing tea formed a backdrop to the quiet drama. However, the desert has its own laws. You will be given a day's supply of water and sent east on foot. If your God wills it, you may find your way to the Persian border. If not, then the Jinn of the sands may claim you after all. It is more than you deserve, and less than I must report. Captain Karim Al-Jamil answered. Lavon Bogosian simply nodded once, a gesture of final acceptance. There were no more words to be said. As he was led away, my friend turned to our Afghan guide. "A most equitable solution, Captain. One worthy of Solomon," Sherlock Holmes, as Sigerson replied. Karim looked towards the horizon, where the sun was now a brilliant orange disk. A weary smile touched his lips. "I have learned from you, my friend, that the truth is often more complex than it appears, and so justice must be as well. My honor is clean. That is enough," said Captain Karim Al-Jamil.
And so our journey continued. The false dragon remained in its chest, a hollow prize for a distant ruler. Captain Karim's reputation was secure, and the friendship forged between him and Holmes had been tempered into something strong and lasting. Yet, as we rode on into the vast, shimmering emptiness, the sun beginning to warm the leather of our saddles, I could not help but wonder about the true Jade Dragon of Kashgar. Its fate, like so many secrets of that endless desert, remained unknown, a whisper of a story lost to the wind and the sand.